Thank you very much for coming here. This is a little bit different Republika than before. When we started 15 years ago, nobody really cared about our topics, at least not in the German political landscape. That has changed a bit. We have a new federal government, and the question is, will we have more luck now after 16 years or more of bad luck? So we'll see. You have to go back a little bit, not quite to the beginning, when Michael Kloß from the CSU started, kicked off CeBIT a while ago, and then in an interview with ZDF, mentioned that he has people that use the internet for him. But we can look back at a time when we had Dobrindt, de Maizière, and Gabriel as three internet ministers, digital ministers at the same time. They created the digital agenda. We all remember e-government for all, broadband, internet for all. Everything is going better. And well, we see today the results of that strategy. In the meantime, CDU sent their best man to Brussels as the EU digital commissar, and history shows the best digital ministry is of little use if Günther Oettinger is in it. So you thought that CSU go get some beer, and it got even better because then Andreas Scheuer became responsible for many digital issues on top of being Minister of Transport. And then Dorothee Bär next to him, although she has been active also for the Ministry of Transport before, now she also took on responsibility for broadband. So we know the promises, we heard the promises. 2021, Germany's administration will be completely digital. Now we have 2021. I don't know if anyone here has used more than one or two e-government applications in the wild. Personally, I haven't. And in Berlin, well, it's really hard to get even an appointment to the Bürgeramt online. But there's still too few. Then the German government thought, maybe digital agenda was a bit too ambitious. And instead of a digital strategy, they came up with an implementation strategy, which was more or less a collection of loose papers, various initiatives where all ministries do something with digital, including just like website projects, whereas others were promising e-government for all. And it was a little bit funny. They wanted to publicly communicate the progress on the strategy. There was a website, a dashboard, digitalmade.de, that should show the progress. And we had a running gag at netzpolitik.org where we had a monthly reminder to ask them when the dashboard was finally going to be published. So eventually, after 1 or 2 years, they had a dashboard. And in preparation for this talk, I thought, let's see what it looks like now. And this is it. It's offline and references another website. We also noticed that the old infrastructure was working during the COVID pandemic, or at least so far. And this is approximately the level where the German government and the Traffic Light Coalition is working on. So it can get a little worse, and that gives us a little hope. But again, 3 people that presented the coalition agreement where they want to dare more progress and have an alliance for freedom and justice and sustainability. And from the perspective of digital politics, it's surprisingly good. It's better than we expected. There's a lot of the demands that we have made publicly also here at Republika are part of this coalition agreement. But there should be a right to encryption and a surveillance bill, something that the Constitutional Court is demanding for years, that you cannot look at surveillance law and regulation individually, but you have to look at the totality of it to figure out, do we still have freedom, or are we already in a surveillance state? There is the Freedom Commission, the independent body of experts that's supposed to advise on future security legislation and evaluate any restrictions on freedom. Biometric recognition in public spaces is supposed to be banned under European law, but they want to increase video surveillance in crime hotspots. Hackbacks, so hacking back against hacker attacks, are rejected in principle as a means of cyber defense, but they're currently still doing it. And then the security authorities ought to be able to be better controlled by parliament, data protection authorities. Sounds great. The right to anonymity is to be guaranteed both in public space and on the internet. We're strengthening digital civil rights and IT security, and it's the state's duty to guarantee them. Wonderful. We stipulate open standards for public IT projects, and development contracts are generally commissioned as open source. The corresponding software is, as a matter of principle, to be made public, and the digital civil society should be involved more in digital policy processes. So the first test balloon in terms of public money, public code has already been implemented with the Corona Warn app. Unfortunately, numerous politicians have badmouthed their own infrastructure and the media out of ignorance on the subject matter and promoted the Luca app as an alternative, which, while it was promoted by an old rapper, it never really worked for the intended purpose. And of course, there's also negative points. State Trojans are not explicitly excluded, but their use is made more difficult by vulnerability management and case law on online searches. And at least the federal police should no longer have this possibility. Then the German military is supposed to get armed drones, but not be allowed to kill anyone with them illegally. So that's the coalition agreement. Now, a few years later, we are in a game of musical chairs, which is nearing its completion. There's some reshuffling. Again, we have 3 internet ministers. The Kanzleramt took over e-government and general coordination. E-government was then moved back into the Ministry of the Interior. And then Mr. Wissing, Ministry of Digital, is supposed to coordinate everything. And then we have a Ministry of the Economy that is responsible for everything about data, except where the Ministry of Transport is concerned. There's supposed to be a digital budget and digital strategy and a better coordination, which is urgently needed because the Handelsblatt here showed or tried to show what the process looked like and who's responsible for what. And right now we have a situation, this looks complicated, but the reality is even worse, as I had to learn in the past few months. And actually, we have 3+1 internet ministers, because we also have the internet chancellor, who's also somewhat responsible for the task of the chancellor for coordination. So data here, except where it's digital, except where it's transport, except where it's justice or economy, and we don't really know what's going on. The main problem remains there's nobody really digital and motivated, at least not in the first row of government, which is sad.
At Republica, interestingly, a part of these persons will be speaking today or tomorrow, such as Nancy Faeser. And we're excited to see how she will explain her politics and policy and what are the plans for the futures. We're very excited to see all those plans from the coalition agreement implemented. So this is back when the digital ministry had to build all the radio towers themselves. 50 megabits per second, that was the promise for everyone at the end of 2018. And everyone who's ever left the inner city of Berlin knows what it's like. Today, the Telecommunication Act is supposed to be implemented and giving us a right to internet, but internet at the moment is defined as 10 megabits down and 1.7 megabits up. So, math quiz, you're a family of 4 in the pandemic and you all need to do a video conference. So how many people can do a video conference with 1.7 megabits of upload? Fun fact or no fun fact, this is almost the speed I had 20 years ago on my slow DSL. The parliament suggests 30 30 up, 50 down. This is a little bit better, but they still rely on the market to really implement that. And there was a funny experiment a few years ago where a horse was quicker in transferring data than the German internet, and it still stands as it is. So we've reached internet society, even though no one's really seen it. But here at Republica, I think we have 200 or 20 gigabits, so gigabit is at home here, even though it's not in all of Germany. And the promises are going on until 2030. And it's even been pushed back because, well, in 3 years, maybe people will have phones, but no more. But on the EU level, there's a lot more. During the past year, there was preparations for the upcoming digital strategy that's supposed to be presented soon. And the EU did some regulations with the Digital Market Act, which should become a digital basic law. Unified rules on the domestic market. The good news is that the provider privilege will remain as it is. So if you only route data, you're not liable. But the rest is a bit sticky. The Digital Market Act adds more rules for so-called flops, which are large corporations with a certain annual turnover and things like 10,000 business users. So all in all, it applies to about 10 companies. But it's a lot of messengers, such as WhatsApp, and this is going to be actually implemented, which results in a controversy if that doesn't screw with the encryption. But interoperability between messengers is possible with open standards, even if history has shown that surveillance and standardizing communication standards has always been misused or abused to implement surveillance, but there's a lot of attention on the topic. And who doesn't know it as an Apple user? There should be more competition, and search engines such as Google and Android should be linked in order to have more surveillance, because their business model is advertisement. Then there's the Digital Services Act, the big sister of the Digital Market Act. It promises users more transparency in understanding how algorithmic decision-making works. This is a very complicated debate, and it results in having funny signs and not being much smarter. But instead of those awful news feeds, we might have more chronological news feed. Platforms have to submit risk assessments which show their impact on society. So we don't need to rely on whistleblowers. They will communicate it themselves. And there should be more data access rights for scientists and researchers, because at the moment what is happening is a black box that is not regulated. And we will have certified organizations and researchers who will be able to fact-check press releases. So then there will be unified regulations on deleted content, shadow bans, restrictions that should be communicated more transparently, because you all know it. You post shit on the internet, you're banned. So you ask what happens, and when you do, like when we ask as netzpolitik.org, it's very quick, but not all people have that. that power. So clear regulations on deletion. The member states have to decide on what that exactly means. But not everything's good about the Digital Services Act. There's no ban on personalized ads. So basically, we're screwing with the system, and this is what causes all the bad ramifications on social media. There's an unholy alliance between Google and some certain publishers. And now this is being threatened. There should be a ban on personalized advertisements for children and young adults. And, well, we should call this a success. For adults, profiling on sexual preferences and so on should be banned. We're excited for it. And patterns to manipulate user behavior will also be banned or shall be banned. But there's, you know, the cookie banners show that there's a problem with implementation. Months after the final result or agreement should be published, there was a very intransparent trialogue in the EU where some last-minute negotiations were held. And the French wanted to wait for the election to pass through, and until today, many people in the EU are still working on the legislation that might allow us to see what became of it. But the core problem remains. The best law, and this is not what the GDPR is, suffers from the implementation in Ireland or Luxembourg. So at least we learned something from the whole thing, because in Luxembourg and in Ireland, we have the big tech companies and they're not exactly motivated, and there's so much behind it, so many jobs, so many so much tax income, so this results on them not looking exactly what is happening. But now on the EU level, there is going to be responsibility, and they kind of made a trick to have license fees of about 0.05% of the complete turnover. And on top of that, there's there's penalties. And what's going to be exciting is how will those rules be implemented in Germany, and this is completely unclear as of now. Who could be the regulatory body? The problem of the last few years was always that we had so many regulation instances with so many working groups that met up and tried to find responsibilities. And on the other hand, Google, Facebook, and co. are playing out all the cards against each other. We have so many authorities, which I'm listing right now. There's a special authority on fake Amazon products. And what would be logical would be to found a new digital agency that thinks digitally, that unifies competencies, that regulates the platforms. But we're in Germany, and I'll just assume the worst case. The worst case is a working group of the authorities and instances I just named. So in the meantime, we can see that it can be useful to just make facts. Elon Musk threatened to buy Twitter, then he didn't, but it shows that it's not cool if you don't have democratic rules, and then a billionaire with a doubtful motivation can just buy a platform and promise maximum freedom of speech. So when looking at Elon Musk's Twitter, with his behavior, he could already make our debate culture on Twitter more inclusive, but he doesn't. So the problem that is added, the data generated on Twitter is very valuable and very easy to misuse in order to make some opinions more public and others less. Musk is a master of this game, and so it's very important for us to get rules. Here you see Elon Musk visiting the Commissioner Thierry Breton, and you don't need any sound, frankly. You only need to watch the mimics and gesticulation. He's basically like a schoolboy being preached to that he can't set his own rules. The EU does. There's more topics, and those are topics that we have on the Republica because they need more attention. 10 years ago, we fought for net neutrality rules in the EU, and this is back on the tables. Back then it was about zero rating policies. And we were trying to tell people this is not legal, this should be banned. And for a few years, this was just accepted. Telegram and others had to withdraw their offers, but one outcome was the question, can telecommunication providers open their hands to both sides and take money from both sides? The answer was no back then, because when you raise fees for routing, many don't know that there's many handshakes, and if the telecommunication lobby had their way, they would take money from both sides and have themselves paid twice. It's handy for them if everyone has to pay a fee for having their traffic routed, and we as normal consumers can't get a good internet speed. Instead, large corporations get it. This is something we urgently have to fight, because only telecommunication providers win in the end. Then we had the EID debate. The idea is okay and it's right. You don't want to be dependent on Google, Facebook and co, who do verifications online on our phones, so that we give the state authority of certification and authorization away to private companies. But the answer that EID gives, the EU legislation, is we're not providing a good solution, but we're just trying to build something and create a market so that many companies buy into it. And this raises the danger that we have a kind of super cookie that does our complete authentication on the web, and that doesn't include data security. So a lifelong EID would be a gift for Facebook and co, because they could use it for their advertisement strategies. Then we have 5 years of the fight against end-to-end encryption. So far, the motivation was fighting or creating state Trojans. And in the coalition agreement, on the one hand, we have a right to encryption, which we don't know how it's going to be implemented. And on the other hand, the Ministry of the Interior is doing everything in their power to counteract encryption. And throwback to 2011, web blocks are back. So it's not just about internet blocks. So censorship Ursula von der Leyen is back with DNS barriers, and this is all to fight child abuse videos on our smartphones. So this is a sort of alert about forbidden content on your smartphones, and it's the biggest threat to privacy since a long time. And there's a lot of protest that's organizing itself, and I urge you to do the same, organize yourselves, because Germany is just one of 27 or 28 member countries. So this legislation package is so big that you don't even know what to campaign against. But you can assume that it has content that just serves as a destruction. And we're back. We're going to be back at the European courts. And now my time is almost over. It's always the same debates we had 10 to 15 years ago are coming back as zombies. So we need endurance. But if we stick with it, if we network, if we fight together, this is what Republica is for. Have fun, wear your mask, for yourself, for the others. Goodbye.